The 21st century brought us armed drones. The emergence of unmanned military drones over the first 20 years of the 21st century poses great questions about how their usage in combat zones affects the status quo in relation to human rights norms. Since 2001, their deployment has morphed from cautious usage to now being viewed as the only game in town, to quote a former CIA director, Leon Panetta. The Bush years, 2001 to 2009. After the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, the United States government began to use drones against al-Qaeda targets. Under the Bush administration, an expansive approach towards drones was adopted. Bush declared that the US was in a global war against terrorists, a forever war which had no geographic constraints and where the battlefield was of a global nature. The war was to follow terrorist enemies wherever they were located and wherever the battlefield could be temporarily situated. According to the US Supreme Court case, Hamdan versus Rumsfeld, the United States was at war against al-Qaeda and Taliban forces, and the applicable laws were the international laws of war. Congress need not be consulted, and thus military force, including the dubious use of drones, could be authorized. During the Bush years, drones were used frugally. As Bush administration counterterrorism official Richard Clarke put it, the administration and the CIA did not want to create broad precedent that would allow intelligence officials in the future to have hit lists and routinely engage in something that approximated assassination. The drones were used sparingly, mainly against particular high-value targets. The Obama years, 2009 to 2017. From 2009 onwards, under Barack Obama, this precedent was to change. Within a year, the Obama administration had presided over more strikes than the Bush administration had in the previous 8. Obama took a far more personal role, signing off on lists of targets and weekly meetings with the CIA director, infamously named Terror Tuesday. By micromanaging in this fashion, Obama injected executive authority into the CIA's targeting practices, directly legitimizing expansions in the scope and pace of targeting. The Obama administration believed, like the Bush administration, that the laws of war applied to the use of drone strikes because the United States was still engaged in an armed conflict. In 2010, Howard Koh, the State Department legal advisor, formally justified the use of drones because they were authorized under the principles of distinction and proportionality to ensure that the targets were legitimate and collateral damage was minimized. The president had vowed to change America's message to the Muslim world and to forge a new partnership based on mutual respect and mutual interest in his famous Cairo speech. However, when Obama accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in December 2009, he'd authorized more drone strikes in the Middle East and North Africa than George W. Bush had approved during his entire presidency. Obama is reported to have been conflicted consistently throughout his presidency. Whilst idealistically, he had always been of the mind to avoid collateral damage at almost any cost, if there was a clear shot at the terrorist leader Osama bin Laden, even one that risked civilian casualties, he wanted to be advised on these opportunities. Pressure grew over the course of Obama's first term, with external organizations demanding the administration be more transparent and answer for its cavalier use of drones. As a result, President Obama was to make his first public comments on the use of drones in January 2012. He addressed the mounting allegations of civilian casualties by stating, "I want people to understand, actually, drones have not caused a huge number of civilian casualties." Still, independent outlets were suspicious of these claims, as their independent research indicated that the numbers of civilian deaths were a lot higher than what the administration were claiming. In May 2013, the administration formalized efforts to prevent civilian casualties by codifying the presidential policy guidance. It was known colloquially as the drone playbook, and put certain restrictions on how strikes were conducted outside areas of active hostilities. Under these reforms, the US military would need near certainty that strike would result in no civilian deaths in order to conduct it. In this case, the Obama administration indicated a willingness to be held to a standard more stringent than that of the international laws of war. By the end of Obama's 2 terms in office, even with the reforms the administration had introduced to appease anti-drone campaigners, there was still a concerning incongruous difference between the figures released by the administration concerning civilian deaths and those calculated by independent researchers. Furthermore, as the Trump transition team prepared to take the mantle from Obama, the drone reforms that his administration had introduced looked precarious and in danger of total overhaul. The Trump years, 2017 to 2021. Under President Donald Trump, the use of drones in US combat operations increased significantly. The Trump administration averaged one drone strike every 1.5 days versus every 5.4 days during the Obama administration. Not only did the number of missions utilizing drone strikes increase, but the threshold for when they were deployed was significantly lower. The Trump administration seemed intent on undoing many of the policies, procedures, and restraints put in place by the Obama administration. Obama's drone playbook, the PPG, was only policy and not entrenched in law. The Trump administration made it clear it was rescinding on certain standards for drone strikes, as detailed in the document, including the necessity for targets to pose a continuing and imminent threat, and for there to be a near certainty that no civilians would be injured or killed in a given strike. Such relaxation drastically put civilians at heightened risk as the threshold for conducting lethal strikes was lowered. Under Trump, there was a general acceptance of greater civilian casualties. As a result, the United States has seen greater opposition to its drone program by partners and allies, as well as the countries directly targeted by American strikes. Predictions for the Biden years. As the Trump era comes to an end and President Biden takes office as Commander-in-Chief, questions are raised regarding what his approach to the US drone program will be. Biden has maintained silence for years on the controversial and continued use of armed drones. Biden has never publicly disavowed or criticized former President Barack Obama's legacy of expanding the use of drones, nor made clear his own policy. Biden, during his presidential campaign, marketed himself as the unity Obama continuity candidate. In office, Biden might be keen to carry on the drone program in a manner not too different from that of his one-time boss. However, Biden should rethink the devastating counter-terrorism policies of his predecessors. In the eyes of many around the world, America's drone war has become a symbol of injustice, oppression, and impunity that has led to both global and local radicalization of Muslim populations who are living with its consequences. The problem of dehumanization. As armed drones are integrated further into a military's arsenal, the risk of dehumanization of the individuals whose lives are affected by the unintended consequences of drone strikes is exacerbated. As Army Chaplain D. Keith Shirtleft has noted, as wars become safer and easier, as soldiers are removed from the horrors of war and see the enemy not as humans but as blips on a screen, there is a real danger of losing the deterrent that such horrors provide. The fact that war has become dehumanized for the drone operator leads some to question whether war has become too easy and whether decisions to engage in lethal operations are now being taken too lightly. Lowering the threshold and its implications. As remote war becomes easier to conduct and the threshold for the use of armed force is systematically lowered, the threat to global peace and security increases. Politicians understand that there is a political cost to launching military intervention overseas. However, by using unmanned armed systems, it makes it much easier for political leaders to opt in to using lethal military force without having the need to put boots on the ground. The availability of armed drones, it appears, pushes political leaders away from engaging in the often difficult and long-term work of solving the root causes of conflict through diplomatic and political means towards a quick, short-term fix of taking out the bad guys. As General Stanley McChrystal, former commander of US and NATO forces in Afghanistan, told a conference in London in 2015, agrees that the capabilities of drones makes them more palatable to military decision makers and lowers the threshold for lethal force. Even Barack Obama seemed to accept this when he told CNN in May 2016 it became so easy to use them without thinking through all the ramifications. As drones lower the threshold to war, it is not surprising that we have thus seen the expansion of warfare and the theatres of conflict, as Western states become blazing to expand conflict into ever-increasing zones. A case study, UK airstrikes in Syria and Iraq against Islamic State. The case study of British airstrike expansion into Syria in 2014 and 2015 can be presented as a case study of this blazing attitude to expand conflict zones. In September 2014, following a request for help from the Iraqi government, British MPs debated a government motion to authorise the use of armed force against ISIS strictly within the borders of Iraq. MPs approved the motion and strikes in Iraq began almost immediately. Within 6 weeks, however, British drones were crossing the border into Syria. Then subsequently, with the intelligence gathered by the British, drones were then being used by the US-led coalition forces to undertake strikes in Syria. Without a UN resolution or a request from the Syrian government, any military operation by the UK within Syria is contentious at best. From mid-2015, UK military officials began arguing that it was illogical and even immoral that UK forces could not undertake airstrikes against ISIS in Syria as well as Iraq. In August 2015, UK drones operating in Syria controversially undertook the targeted killing of Cardiff-born Rayad Khan. The fact that British drones were already flying missions in Syria and had already launched one strike and assisted with others was used in part to leverage support. A government motion to extend UK military action from Iraq into Syria was subsequently tabled and passed in September 2015. It is highly unlikely that UK operations and strikes against ISIS in Syria prior to the December 2015 vote would have occurred without the availability of armed drone systems. It seems the technology itself is enabling an expansion of warfare. How lack of transparency damages democracy. Whilst official secrecy is heralded as a paramount for a state's national security, it needs to be remembered that its overuse can result in government secrets being at odds with foundational principles of democracy. Because the US government has not disclosed the full legal and policy standards governing its drone programs, an informed and robust public debate about the merits of the government's use of drones is impossible, creating an accountability vacuum between not only government and citizens, but also the state and the international community. Greater disclosure of information would help prevent abuses, facilitate democratic accountability, and increase the legitimacy of US action abroad. Greater transparency may help the United States reclaim some of the moral authority it has lost with the unsupportable claims of authority to kill in secrecy and with virtually no public accountability. What does precision really mean? The need for democratic accountability is needed even more starkly when the constant presentation of drone warfare is that it is some form of precision warfare. Whilst most people would understand precision to mean accuracy, it is very important to be aware that when the military uses the term precision strike, they are not referring to the accuracy of the strike. Rather, they are pointing to a process of bringing a wide system of assets to bear to enable the strike to take place. As Lieutenant Colonel Jill Long of the USAF explains, by using a word that has such specific meaning in the mind of most citizens, it is easy to see how a gap in understanding and expectations has been fostered. It is hard to call drone strikes accurate when circa 90% of deaths resulting from their use are unintended civilian casualties. From a normative perspective, whether drone strikes are legal or illegal doesn't change the reality that because of heavy collateral damage, US drone strikes as a tool of counter-terrorism could in reality be counterproductive to US efforts to curtail terrorism globally. In conclusion, under the laws of war, the US and other nation states continue to argue that drone strikes are not per se illegal because they satisfy the relevant international requirements. However, if there continues to be no statute law or binding international agreement that limits governments' use of drones as a military tool, the gap in the law, which has presented itself to presidents and world leaders, will continue to be exploited for the sake of expediency. It is clear what drones are capable of, but it is also clear that the legalities are grey and allow those responsible to escape transparency and accountability. The external electorate deserves to know what their government is doing in their name. With the leaps we have made in technology, it is not a novel idea that we also make leaps in our protective systems, our justice and our laws. Drones are becoming ubiquitous, but their arbitrary use should not be. The international community quickly needs to find a solution which regulates their use more assiduously.